Hi, I'm Carl Franklin, and this episode of Blazor Train is the first of a series I'm calling Ask the Engineer. Wow, it's good to have audio people. This is where I'm answering your questions about Blazor, solving your puzzles, detangling your
Unfucking JavaScript.
You're not wrong, but dude, be nice. So stick around because Ask the Engineer is coming up right now, right here on Blazor Train. Our first question to the engineer is from Nona. And Nona writes, Dear Carl, why doesn't debugging work in Blazor WebAssembly? In a Blazor server app, I can set breakpoints in the lifecycle overrides like onInitialized, but in WebAssembly, Visual Studio doesn't stop on the breakpoints. Can I say that? WTAF, what does that mean? Well, Nona, there is a workaround for getting breakpoints and lifecycle methods to work in a Blazor WebAssembly app. All right, so Nona says that her breakpoints in lifecycle methods aren't catching in a Blazor WebAssembly application, but they are working in a Blazor server application. Well, I've got a WebAssembly application here, and I've got my index right there, and I'm going to put a breakpoint on an onInitialized override right there, and let's run it and see what happens. So Nona, you're right, it didn't catch, but here's the trick, okay? Get this, go to any other page, just navigate away from the index page, and this is debugging in Visual Studio, right? And now go back to index. It works. So that's the answer. That's the golden nugget that you're getting from Blazor Train today, is that if you want these lifecycle events to support debugging and breakpoints and all that stuff, just navigate away and navigate back. That's all there is to it. Isn't this fun? Our next question came from Russell, who says, Carl, I have a problem in...
Yeah, you're watching this dumb show.
I have a problem in which I'm calling a method from JavaScript and it works. But if I navigate away from the page and back to it, the method isn't getting called. Well, I looked at Russell's code and I think I figured out his problem. So Russell's problem is that calls from JavaScript to C# are working the first time that he navigates to a page, but if he navigates off the page and back, those events don't get called. Well, I think I understand the problem, but let's set up the scenario, okay? First of all, let's set up the index page to handle a call from JavaScript. There it is. So what we've got here is we're handling a mouse move event that happens in JavaScript. We're going to call this window mouse move, passing the X and Y. We're going to set a string, mouse coords, right here, showing the X and Y. And we're just going to show that up in a string, in a paragraph. So in order to do this, we have to register the page. In other words, we have to call a JavaScript method. Doesn't matter what we call it, but I've called it register page. And we have to pass a .NET object reference from this particular instance of the index component. Okay, we're doing that in an onAfterRender async where first render equals true. So this is guaranteed to happen only once in the life cycle of this page. That's why we're doing it here. You cannot call JavaScript from an onInitialized async because the page doesn't exist yet, the JavaScript doesn't exist yet, all of that stuff hasn't happened yet. So this is a good place to call your first JavaScript method. Now, let's go to index.html because this is a WASM application. And let's add some script. So take a look. Window.register page, we're passing in this thing called .NET reference. And we've got this variable called .NET ref. And if we haven't set it yet, we're going to set it to the .NET reference. And now we're going to handle the window.onMouseMove event. And when we get that, we're going to invoke on that .NET reference our window mouse move passing, yes, you guessed it, EV client X and EV client Y. Right? That'll give us the X and Y of the window, the browser. So let's run it and see what happens. Now this is Russell's code that Russell sent to me. So I'm recreating the problem exactly as he did it. Now you can see as I'm moving here that this value right here, X and Y, is changing, right? All right, now what he's saying is when we navigate away from the index and back to it, that it's not happening. And indeed, in my application, on my machine, I'm not getting anything. Now, why is this? Can anybody tell me? All right, take a look at the C# code. Go ahead and take a look at it for a second. Do you see anything in there that's out of the ordinary? Okay, now the only other part is the JavaScript. Do you see anything here that's out of the ordinary? Well, I do. Here's the problem right here. Okay? We're only setting this .NET reference if it equals null. If it's been set once, we don't set it again. And the problem with that is it only gets set on the first one. When you move off a page and then you move back to it, everything gets reset, including whatever this is, right? This is a different reference. So therefore, .NET object reference.create this is going to return a different object because it's different. The old one has been disposed and the new one is in memory. So the solution for Russell is to just get rid of this stupid check right here. You don't need to worry about that. Set the .NET reference every time. All right? Just because your page was disposed doesn't mean that JavaScript was disposed. JavaScript and C# live in two different areas of the browser. JavaScript global for the lifetime of the browser. C#, the pages, the components come and go. They get created, they get disposed, and therefore you cannot count on when your page or component is disposed, the associated JavaScript will also be disposed. So therefore, just override whatever .NET reference is there and set it. Let's see if it works. Okay, we got our coordinates right there. We go to counter or fetch data or whatever. We come back. Hey, it still works. And there you go, Russell. There's your answer. Next, I heard from Jillian who said, "Yo, Carl, how do I make a background process in Blazor WebAssembly? I want a time-elapsed display on my page, but I don't want it to interfere with anything else." All right, so Jillian wants a time-elapsed timer to count the number of hours, minutes, seconds that have elapsed since the app was first used. And she kind of wants a background process for this. So how do we do that? Well, I have the solution right here, Jillian. So to index, I've added a time counter string and a little header that shows the elapsed time with that time counter string. Now, how do I calculate that? Well, remember I told you that in on after render async, if first render is true, this only happens once in the life cycle of that component, right? So it's either the first rendering or the second or whatever, but it's only the first rendering once. So what we're going to do is, yes, we have our register page for our mouse move and all that, but after that, we're going to invoke some code here. We're going to go into a loop. Now, I don't really recommend using while true and then counting on yourself to break at the right point, but in this case, you're just going to want to keep going and going and going, and when the page is disposed, this code will go away. So it's really okay. Now what you don't want to do is go into a tight loop with no delay. That would be bad. Then you would bring your machine, or your browser at least, to a screeching halt. So the first thing we're doing is we're waiting. We're waiting for 1 second, and you can do that with await task.delay 1000. So we're just going to pause for 1 second, but we're going to allow other things to happen, of course, because this is async. Now we're going to increment the seconds because a second has passed, and we're going to get a time span from that total number of seconds. Now, if the total number of seconds is greater than 1 hour, which is 60 times 60, 60 minutes times 60 seconds, 3,600 seconds, we're going to set this time counter string to string.format in this formatting formula right here, which is going to give us hour, minutes, seconds. And the hour is going to be a single digit. So if it's 9 or below, it's not going to be 09. It's just going to be 9, minute, second. All right. Otherwise, we're going to use the standard minute, second format. So this is just, time, date, format, strings. You can Google that or Bing it all you want. And then we're going to tell everybody that the state has changed so that we can update the page. All right, everything else is the same. So here we go. Here's your timer, Jillian. And there you have it. Now, how can you test with greater amounts of time? Well, just set the seconds. Right? If we want to go beyond 1 minute, we can anything over 60. So like 83. 83 seconds will give us 1 minute and 23 seconds. There it is, 24, 25. And if you want to test for over an hour, just go beyond 3,600. So 4,000, for example. And there you go. So now what's cool about this is I can go, dispose that, no problem, go away. And when I come back, it starts over again. So there you go. Jillian, I hope I answered your question for you. Finally, I got a letter from Raj who says, my app is working in Blazor WebAssembly, but not Blazor server. Every time I call a C# method from JavaScript, the Blazor circuit closes. My app goes ghost white, and then it continues. That doesn't happen in WASM. Help! All right, Raj, your application is working in Blazor WebAssembly, but not in Blazor server. You're getting this weird error that happens when you try to call a C# method from JavaScript, but only in Blazor server. Man, I hate those kind of problems. Well, anyway, Raj, you sent me your code, you showed me what it was, and I distilled it down to something that I can show the Blazor train folks what your problem is without having to use all of your code. And here's the change we're going to make. So in on after render async, if the first render, we're calling our register page. But what we're doing is we're creating a string of 50,000 bytes. In other words, it's going to be a string of 50,000 characters, which is what Raj is trying to send back from JavaScript. Right? And it's just random. I'm just using random data here. and I'm going to modify my register page to accept data as a parameter. And then on mouse move, I'm also going to accept data as a parameter. So I'm going to expect that JavaScript sends me back that 50,000 character string. Okay. I'm not going to do anything with it. I just want to make sure I can pass it. So let's modify the JavaScript. So now we've got a var test data. I'm passing data as an option to register page. I'm now setting test data here, right, to that. And now when I invoke, I'm passing test data as a parameter. Pretty simple. So I should be able to run this, and because Raj says it works in WebAssembly, it should work no problem in our application. Yep, there it is. No errors, no hangups, no nothing. I get my X and Y, and every single mouse move coordinate, JavaScript is passing me back in C# in the browser a string that's 50,000 characters, or 50K long. All right. Now let's create a Blazor server application and copy in that same index razor file and the same script, and we'll see what happens. All right, so here's my server application, and I'll copy over the index for that and go to the JavaScript, add the script. You know, one of the promises of Blazor is that you can use the same code on the server as you can use on the client, etc., etc. But this is a very interesting case. So to test this, I'm going to set my server application as the startup project, and we'll just run it and see what happens. All right, elapsed time is working. Now let me do a mouse move. Oh, error. And it seems to have corrected itself, right? But let me press F12 and see what's really happening. Oh yeah, we got errors. Oh, every single time we do a mouse move, we're getting this kind of thing. The server returned an error on close. So it's just closing the connection. It's not even giving me any kind of error message that I can use. But it doesn't really matter. We know it's blowing up, right? So the reason that it's blowing up is because the difference between Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor Server. In Blazor WebAssembly, all the code is running in the browser, and the JavaScript is also in the browser, and the interop between the two is in memory. In Blazor Server, the C# code is running on the server, but the JavaScript is running in the browser. So when the JavaScript wants to send data back to the server, as in this case, right, it has to go through SignalR. Now, SignalR has a maximum message size, and it's 32K by default. So if I change this to 32K, it's going to work. But that is not what Raj wants. Raj wants to send 50K. And maybe tomorrow he's going to want to send 60K. I don't know. So there is a way to increase that maximum. So go to Startup, and we're going to change this Add Server-Side Blazor in Configure Services with a hub option of maximum receive message size equals 100K. So now, even though it may not be a good idea for scalability reasons, I can send at least 100K in every message. And there you go. It seems to be working. And Raj, I'm glad to have answered your question. And if you have more questions, well, Carl in the studio will tell you all about it. Back to you, Carl. Thanks, Carl. And if you've got a Blazor question that you'd like answered on Blazor Train, send it to carl@appvnext.com, along with a $1,000 Amazon gift coupon. I'll see what I can do. Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time. Blaze a trail.